Hi everyone, welcome to the video that I promised a while ago. It's the review of my Ikoria Lair of Behemoths set review, where I go back all the way to before I'd even played with any of the cards and see just how accurate I was in predicting how well these cards would be played, how often they'd be played, if they'd be any good. I'm hoping that I'll be at least a little bit decent in my predictions, but I have a feeling that I was pretty wrong for most of it. We'll run through it and we'll see just exactly how it goes. Alright, so I may have rated pretty much all of these cards probably 1 star too high. Obviously with Voracious just didn't see play anywhere at all ever. So giving it a 3 stars seems a little bit too much. Snapdax didn't see basically any play either. It is a really strong card. Obviously got played in the first week, but really not something you'd want either. So that's probably a 1 as well. Vadrox similarly, never really saw play anywhere ever. If there was sort of a Jeskai aggressive creature deck playing something like Teferi, which doesn't seem like it's very likely to come up at all. That's kind of where I thought it would have seen play, but that deck never really came up. So that's definitely a 1 star also. Luna. Now that one I really liked, and I continued to like it after it got released as well. Like there was definitely a Teemo Mutate, the Amuri deck that was running around. I think majority of them ended up just being Simic because the Starix was actually ended up being the better version of a Luna almost. It just kind of drew you more cards and put more permanents on the field than a Luna ever could. So it kind of got wasted by a random uncommon somehow. So that ended up being more like a 3-star card instead of a 4, but I think I really enjoyed it. I liked the Teemo version. I have a soft spot for a Luna. I don't really regret rating it 4. 3 would probably be a bit more appropriate though. Nethroy also just saw no play. I played it a little bit like the first week because I really like the Abzan colors and I wanted to try out and see what it would be like, but really it's just there's nothing really to say about this. All of these apexes are 1 star except for Luna, which I think should be a 3 possibly. Alright, so the next lot of mythics we got here, some of these I was pretty high on for a good reason, and some of them I was a bit more high on for no real good reason. So the most egregious one here is definitely Chevel, and it's really a pet card of mine. I really think it is an amazing card against aggro. Against like really small weenie creatures, having 3 toughness is amazing, and against the Gruul creature decks, the Death Touch is amazing as well. And I have actually managed to trigger the card draw on this guy in standard, and it feels really good when you get to do it. But that being said, while he's amazing in those matchups, he's absolutely awful in pretty much every other matchup. And those matchups like Jeskai Fires, Bant Ramp, and Wilderness Reclamation, he's just awful. And those are actually all the top decks in standard. So he being bad against all those decks, but being good against all the tier 3 creature decks, probably not where you want to be. So he's more like a 2 star. I should give him a 1, but I like him a lot, so I'll give him that extra star. Fiend Artisan, a bit more overrated in the early weeks of standard, but he did end up getting phased out. He got played a wee bit in the sacrifice decks. I'm not sure exactly how much he got played after that. I've definitely not seen a Fiend Artisan in any lists for a long time. So I think the 3 stars there is kind of appropriate. It was played a little bit, but kind of faded out a little bit and wasn't really a major player. With General Kudro, I don't think he's actually had his time to shine yet. Humans, there's quite a lot of them in standard, obviously, with such a massive card pool at the moment, but there wasn't really a deck that he really fit into, even though he's an amazing card. I think he could see potential later on, but he really didn't make that much of a splash in Standard. So he gets the 3 stars, that's pretty nice. That's about right. And Kenan, yeah, this card basically got ousted by the fact that there's a lot more broken things you can do with that mana sink. It's obviously an amazing card, but yeah, there's just absolutely no reason to be playing that card at the moment. But it could be something happening in the future. It gets a 2-star. It's a really broken commander, obviously, but in Standard didn't see much going on. Now Luca, I gave 4 stars, and as you all know, this card was the bane of Standard for quite a wee while. It felt like a long time, but it wasn't actually that long before the deck got banned out. Now 4 stars, at the time, that seemed like a good amount to when you don't really realize that there's going to be this amazing combo, and looking at the best ETB creature in Standard and stealing things all the time, just how egregiously awful that would be. At the time, I just thought this was kind of a value planeswalker, getting rid of your mana dorks and putting in something a little bit larger. But I thought that would have been great value. So I think we could still see Luca happening later, but I mean, he is most known for his broken combo shenanigans, which at the end of the day probably makes him a 5-star card. Alright, so rounding out some of the mythics here, we have Luminous Broodmoth. I gave this a 3 stars mostly because I thought it is actually really strong at what it does. But I didn't really think there would be any room for it in Standard, and there hasn't really been any lists that use Broodmoth properly. There were a few inclusions here and there, but not really anything that stood out and lasted, you know. It was just kind of a good value 4-drop to have in creature decks. Meanwhile, with Narset, that card did make a decent amount of splash. I reckon with 3 stars could have been bumped up to 4. It was a reasonably solid player in the Jeskai Fires lists. You know, as just a 2 of or something, but you know, it did pretty well. With Riel, that card basically saw 0 play. I thought the blue-red drakes of the past could come back, but at the moment it doesn't really seem like there's the right environment. You know, you can't just like slam things with huge power and hope to get away with that's all you do, you know. It's kind of just not quite enough at this day and age, so it didn't really work out. So she's probably more like a 1 or a 2 star. With Vivian, Monsters Advocate kind of went a little bit overboard with the rating there. She is a card that really excited me because of the just massive board presence potential that she can create. Especially like if you say cast her and then immediately minus, you can turn any mana dork that you cast into just say something huge that you just get off the top. And couple that with the static ability, I feel like she definitely has potential, but she just wasn't really used at all. And I don't think there's really a deck that actually utilized her properly. But perhaps if Standard one day gets a little bit more value oriented and a bit less like slamming your fat bombs constantly, you could see play later. Now this last card here, people are probably looking at me a bit funny for giving Winota a 1 star. She obviously absolutely tearing up Historic with some pretty nasty kills, but this was mostly talking about Standard, and I did note that Agent of Treachery is a good hit off of Winota. And honestly, the Standard Winota decks were mostly tier 2-ish. You weren't really like expecting massive numbers of Winota decks in Standard. They were annoying when they got their thing off, but they actually were somewhat inconsistent. I think giving a 1 star to this, I kind of discounted the fact that you look at the top 6 for each human you're attacking with. And that probably should have bumped my rating up to maybe a 3 star. I think a 3 star is fair for Winota in Standard, mostly because it was somewhat inconsistent, even with the complete maximization with tokens and such. Okay, so these three here, Death's Oasis just didn't see any play at all whatsoever, so no one really can play value enchantments that do nothing at the moment, so it's not really something you see ever. So that one really should be a 1-star, I think. Dirgebat, yeah, it was the blue-black flash mutate deck that was running around for a while, so that card definitely saw a decent amount of play, strong enough, and yeah, I'd say 3 stars is good value for that. Draneth Magistrate, yeah, you didn't really see this guy at all. Here's a sideboard card, and a very specific one at that. It could still be a useful card to have, but even it was mostly just because like the last few bits of standard was mostly like not actually casting their own spells, just like flashing things into play and such. And now it doesn't even work against companions, which I think it was meant to have been countering a little bit. Okay, well, for these Ultimatum Cycle cards, I think what I really thought was going to happen was they were going to see sideboard play as a Fey of Wish, Fires of Invention, Shell. And even despite that, I definitely rated these a lot higher than they really should have been. None of these really see any play apart from in Commander. Inspired Ultimatum does see some amount of play, and I'm pretty sure it saw some Wishboard shenanigans back when Fires of Invention was still a card. Ruinous Ultimatum, I think I saw 1 or 2 things of that running around as well. So I think if we just set all of these ultimatums on the top row here to 1-star, and then knock Inspired Ultimatum down to a 3-star, I think that would be about right. Ruinous Ultimatum can stay at 2 stars. I think I definitely saw it running around. Yeah, I think I'm just finding I have the tendency to overrate things a little bit without playing them, so maybe next time I'll have to be a little bit more harsh. And here we have the Triome Cycle. I just 5-starred all of these. And with good reason, they're all equally good. And they all see pretty much the same amount of play. I think Survive Triome, not quite as much. Indantha Triome also played a little bit less. I think that's mostly because Orzhov-ish with splash decks don't tend to be very good at the moment. So yeah, it is mostly Ketria, Rorgrin, and Zagoth that see the most amount of play. But they're all equally good, and they are definitely played as 4-ofs in any deck that can play them. Okay, so we're running through the Companion Cycle now, and I didn't think at the time that the loss of a sideboard slot and adhering to all of these restrictions would make it worth it. I didn't really take into account the fact of the 8th card in your starting hand thing would actually affect the game that much, and turns out it really, really does. That being said, some of these ratings are actually somewhat accurate. Not sure exactly how I managed that, but a lot of these ratings aren't too badly off. Starting off with Garuda here, we have 2 stars, and I think at the end of the day, maybe rating it a 3 would have been a bit better, but this card did see a lot of play in the early weeks, and people seem to think it was massively busted. In the end, it really wasn't. It kind of just died to itself a lot of the time. There were some ridiculous mirror matches that you could have, but it wasn't actually a competitive deck. So yeah, I think a 3 stars would have been a bit better for that one. Gigantha, it was played, mostly because it's such an easy card to include as a companion. You don't really even need to try most of the time to have Gigantha as your companion. Not that it's a very good card at all. It's just a 5-mana 5/5, and I don't think I ever actually saw anyone activating its ability. Maybe like once or twice, I don't know. But you know, it's not really something you actually want to include. It's just something you could, so you just did. So 2 stars there seems fine. With Kahira, later on in the format there was the Kahira fires lists, which seemed pretty strong. Like they definitely did work, and it seemed like a strong deck. So Kahira did see enough play to rate 3 stars there, I think. Garuda also saw quite a lot of play early on in Standard with the Fires of Invention lists, but eventually people did sort of stray away from Garuda in favor of Urion. So this card didn't quite make the cut in terms of viability, so 3 stars there does seem fair. Luminous is quite the egregious rating here. Obviously this card just dominated every single format imaginable. So obviously this is a 5-star card, and I just made a massive mistake here. I should have rated this much higher. And with the second half of the companion cycle here, again rating things quite low. Except for some reason with Lutri, I decided to give that one a 2-star, mostly because I guess I seem to think it was like gonna be brewed around a lot because it's such a unique card. But yeah, that one's not very good. I did try to build a deck around Lutri, it didn't really do anything, so that should be a 1-star. And one of the most completely out of whack ratings for me was Obosh the Prey Piercer. I gave it a 1-star, mostly because I thought Torbran did enough work already, and having to cut Embercleave seemed like such a massive downside at the time that I just wasn't high on this card at all. But obviously Obosh Red and Obosh Sacrifice were huge decks back when companions weren't nerfed, so that should definitely be a 5-star card. Umori, could probably have gone 1-star higher. 2 stars seems a bit low for a card that did have quite a lot of tier 2 decks built around it, or maybe tier 2.5 or 3. Yeah, all the mutate lists basically played this card, and it definitely saw enough play to, I think, rate 3 stars. Urion, Sky Nomad, obviously another of the companions that just saw massive play, completely warping formats. Everyone's playing 80 card decks, and 3 stars is definitely way too low for that. Again, I thought that cards like these weren't really worth the sideboard slot, but I didn't really take into account the 8th card problem. So all of these are rated, in general, a little bit lower than they should be. As an aside, Zerda, yes, that's a 1-star card. Everyone knows it's absolutely awful in Standard. No one plays it. Okay, next up we have the Mythos Cycle, and this one definitely rated all of them quite high. Obviously, pretty much none of these saw any play anywhere. Mythos of Luna saw, I think, a little bit of play, mostly just because clone effects can be quite strong, especially with everyone playing really amazing cards nowadays. You just copy your opponent's things. But yes, Mythos of Brokos saw 0 play. That should be a 1-star card, not 3 stars. Mythos of Luna, I think maybe deserved a 2 stars, but it's not very, definitely not a 3. Mythos of Nethroi, I think you can probably see that I am a fan of Abzan decks, okay? I do think that this card is very strong, and I have been trying my darndest to brew an Abzan deck that actually works, but Mythos of Nethroi is really the only reason to go white at the moment. But if you can, in the future, build yourself a strong Abzan deck, then Mythos of Nethroi will definitely be the core of that. Mythos of Snapdax, that card didn't really see much play anywhere either. I think I saw some people trying it in week 1, but it wasn't really a serious thing. So that should really be 2 stars there, I think. Mythos of Vadrock, didn't see that at all either, really. 4 mana for 5 damage to any targets, divide as you choose, not really the correct rate for that. And you really want to be killing things instead of making them sleep, so it's not really something you would really want to run in Constructed. So yeah, that's definitely a 1-star also. All of these in general rated way too high. Alright, so with these 5 rares here, there's a bit of a mix, a little bit of overrating. Evercool Phoenix, I definitely think it deserves this 2-star. People were definitely trying to make it work. They sort of like saw flashbacks of Rekindling Phoenix, and we were like, wow, this card's pretty much exactly the same. But as we found out, sort of that mutate really isn't a very strong mechanic, and you really don't want to be mutating things a lot of the time unless they do something really busted like Starix. And people didn't really want to play red in their mutate decks either, so that kind of threw Evercool Phoenix out the window pretty early. Extinction Event. Now, I just thought with the vast variety of board wipes at the moment that this card wouldn't really see any play, but it's basically the go-to board wipe at the moment, like especially in the Sultai mid-range decks. And for some reason, I'm not exactly sure if it's correct still. I'm almost tempted to swap out Extinction Events for Ritual of Soot in my Sultai mid-range list. I might try it out. But I think the main draw to this is probably the exiling. It is very important to get rid of cards like Uro at the moment for good. If you don't, you'll just get outground, and yeah, when you board wipe something, you want it to be gone for good. So Extinction Event has that upside. But I've been finding a lot of the time, you just have such a hard choice picking between odd or even. So I'm still a bit low on this card, but I think it probably does deserve the 4-star rating. Frontline Felidar, bulk rare, 1 star, very good. Alright, Gem Razor. This card has seen quite a lot of play in mutate decks and like the tier 2 and stuff, you know. And it's quite solid. People have been main decking it even just because it's quite large, it has trample, makes your things huge. Even if you don't have a lot of enchantments to destroy, it obviously did very well getting rid of 5's Inventions and Wilderness Reclamations. So that's basically what made the mutate decks any good. It's just that they completely annihilated the build around cards of these decks just with one card, and it was great. So I think this Gem Razor probably deserves more like a 3-star rating. It was a solid card in like a tier 2 deck. Hunted Nightmare. I was quite high on this card because I mostly looked at the stats for the mana cost and didn't really take into account the fact that it has an ETB effect, but it's not a good ETB effect. Like the fact that yes, you can line this up that the giving a death touch won't impact the board, or there's no creatures on board, so it doesn't actually trigger. But the fact that your best case scenario is a 3 mana 4/5 menace with no other abilities, that's just not good enough in standard at the moment. It can get bounced, it can just die immediately, it can get, it can still get board wiped, it doesn't replace itself at all, like a lot of creatures do nowadays. So this definitely doesn't deserve the 3-star or 5. You gave it a 4-star even. I think I'd probably just give it a 1 at this point. It didn't see play anywhere. Some people tried Menace Tribal, I know I did, but it didn't really work. And with these 5 cards here, we have a bit more of my classic overrating. 6 mana for a 7/6 that fights something. It's pretty solid, but there's way better things you could be doing with your mana than playing this. I think a 2-star is actually an okay rating for it. Like you could theoretically play this in a ramp deck, and I wouldn't discount seeing maybe 1 or 2 copies of this deck in this card in the future. I wouldn't really discount seeing 1 or 2 Cogglers in the future in standard, but for now 2 stars pretty good. Labyrinth Raptor. I was still high on the Menace Tribal brews that were in my head at the time when I rated this card. And I think what basically made me overrate this is I kind of misread this card as well. I thought you get to choose which creature your opponent sacrifices. With the actual reading in mind, this card really didn't see any play at all. There were just better Rakdos 2-drops that got pushed a little bit ahead of this as well. There's Dreadhorde Butcher, there's that Rakdos Knight that draws you cards. So this one just doesn't quite make the cut. Yeah, but possibly when those cards rotate, there could be a Rakdos aggro deck still, and this card might be a possibility, but it's definitely not something you would be seeing play at all at the moment. Lavabrink Venturer, definitely a really strong creature, but as I sort of thought at the time, there's not really a deck for it. And despite me kind of realizing that, I gave it a 3 stars. I probably should have given it a 2. Being a bit too kind to some of these cards. Same kind of with Offspring's Revenge and Quartzwood Crasher. These cards just aren't really playable. Mardu is not a playable color combination, and Quartzwood Crasher is just a big beater that gets bounced or removed immediately at the moment, so can't really see those being played at all. So they both really received a 1 star. Okay, some more overrating and a little bit of underrating here. Sea Dasher Octopus definitely saw a lot of play in the Mutate decks, and even in a bit of the Flash decks that were running around a lot. They're more like tier 2, tier 3 decks though, and it's quite possible that 4 stars is a little high, but I don't think it's that egregious of a rating. Sea Dasher Octopus is a really strong card, and it definitely saw play. Shark Typhoon, now that's a card that's seen a lot of play. This is one of the staples of Standard, and it will be going forward for a long time. Just having that uncounterable threat that draws you a card, and you can make it as big as you want, and you never have to cast the stupid do-nothing enchantment half of it, just makes it really, really strong, and that should be a 5-star card. Skycat Sovereign, I have a soft spot for this card now. Actually, I've tried playing Blue-White Flyers a lot in the recent weeks, just as a bit of fun, and that deck's like got legs. It's definitely got a positive win rate when I've been playing it, and Skycat Sovereign is a pretty solid inclusion in that deck. I think Skycat Sovereign probably deserved a 3 stars, not a 2. Slitherwisp, I think that probably is about right for where it is. Blue-Black Flash is a really strong deck, but in the end, poor Teferi, just ruining everyone's fun. Slitherwisp is, in fact, one of the core reasons to be playing Blue-Black, but it is a deck that doesn't really get played at all, so 3 stars is about right. Song Creation, I was super high about this card. Just thinking about all the cards you'd be drawing, such good value, and I do have fond memories of playing this card and just completely annihilating people, drawing my entire deck and decking myself and getting the win, but I thought that might actually be a core part of Standard, and it turned out to be just a little bit too clunky. Part of the problem is that you need, with the best part of the combo is Incubation Druid, untapping it, making loads of mana. You need to untap with that Druid, and that's pretty hard to do at the moment. Another thing is Narset is being played, and Narset completely shuts off this enchantment. So yeah, that's really bad. Just because I like this card enough, I want to give it 3 stars instead of 5. Okay, so with these rares, we have the Ozolith. Yep, definitely a 1-star card. No one ever tried playing a deck around this, I'm pretty sure, unless there's someone I've not heard about. It's not very successful anyway. Definitely 1 star. Titan's Nest. Some people going crazy about this in the spoilers, but you know, paying 4 mana to give all your spells delve, just not worth it. Definitely 1 star. Unpredictable Cyclone. Yeah, that card's just really expensive, and it doesn't really work out when you actually try and use it. Like, sure, you can cycle one of your smaller creatures to try and put in something huge with cycling, but never really worked out that way. You're kind of spinning the wheel a bit too much, and do nothing enchantments kind of bad in a format with Teferi and such, so definitely not a good idea. 2 stars is like okay, people definitely tried this card. And then we have Voracious Great Shark. I think I underrated this card a lot, but not by too much, I suppose. It did see a little bit of play. I think it's probably more like a 3-star card than a 1-star, just because like some people played 1 or 2 ofs in their control decks and such, just to get rid of problem creatures and such. As it is, it's alright still. I think you could see more copies of this flying around in the future. Whirlwind of Thought, I don't think I've ever seen this card being cast, ever. So yeah, that should probably be a 1-star. Just being a bit too kind to it, I think. Okay, and last rare, Utero, the Wandering Monster. I obviously gave it a 2-star, mostly just because I thought, hey, people will probably put this in their cycling decks as a minor upside to possibly hitting him every so often and getting a random 8/8 haste, but mostly just using him as a cycle. Turns out that the cycling decks all used Loris as their companion, and therefore Utero didn't fit into those decks, so he saw 0 play. I tried playing him once or twice though. I think the fact that some people played him in week 1 means that the 2 stars probably a fine rating. Okay, and then we have some commons and uncommons that I thought might make some impact. I think pretty much none of these saw real play apart from Cunning Nightbonder in the blue-black flash decks and Fighters 1 in some creature decks. Mardu Knights definitely played Fighters 1, I'm pretty sure. Die Tactics didn't see much play, but it's a card that I could definitely see coming into its own later on when other sets come out. Some more uncommons. Heartless Act, definitely seeing quite a lot of play at the moment. I think the 4 stars is probably pretty good for that. Although sometimes Tyrant Scorn is played over it, which I think could actually end up being correct. Lead the Stampede, hasn't really seen any play at all. Parcel Beast, I rated that 5 stars. There was so much hype about this, like, oh, more turn 3 Nisses coming with Parcel Beast, but Mutate ended up being very weak. People didn't really think it would be that weak, but no one really played Parcel Beast in those decks anyway. It was kind of just not really thought about. Adventurous Impulse, sometimes see a little bit of play, but I think there's definitely not enough creature decks that would want this, especially like with all creature decks mostly playing Umori as their their companion. They can't really fit Adventurous Impulses into those decks, so it didn't really see play because of that. Fire Prophecy, it was played, definitely. It's quite a strong card, but in the same slot there is Scorching Dragonfire, which exiles, which was seen to have more of an upside than the Rummage. So people mostly ended up playing that just to get rid of all those pesky things that keep coming back from the graveyard, which is fair enough. I could see Fire Prophecy being played if Exile ever becomes not important somehow. Yep, and of course there's Wilts, the last card here. Yeah, that's definitely been seeing play. It's just really strong. There's also Return to Nature, which kind of is a bit slightly more flexible, but I think the cycling part means that they're pretty much equal and you could really play either or. Although the fact is that there is quite a lot of graveyard shenanigans going on. Return to Nature is seeing play a little bit over this because of that. And yep, that's basically it. I think it did pretty well. The majority of my ratings were just being a little bit too kind, I think. I think what happened is mostly that a lot of my ratings were just 1 star higher than they should have been. I guess that's kind of just a function of the fact that I'm only rating things out of 5. So a little bit of something wrong either way kind of shows up quite strongly in that, like, if you rate something 3 star but it was really 2 star, it feels like it was really wrong, but there's nothing in between to go for. So I think at the end of the day, rating with 5 stars is good for a initial impression review, mostly because you can't expect to be extremely accurate. No one can predict how metagames are going to shape up. And I think it's a good way to sort of hedge a little bit and say, and a good way of being like, I wasn't actually that wrong, come on. I was pretty wrong about companions though. I completely went off the mark with that. I should have bought into the whole 8th card thing and realized that was just really broken. But there's definitely improvements to be made. This was my first set review, so I think for the next one, the core set, I might end up being just a little bit more accurate, but we'll see. Let me know down below how you thought I went, and I'll catch you for the next one.